Mark, speaking as an old neurophysiologist who's thought about philosophy and theology, maybe a little amateurish over the years, I thought that what is the real question? The real question is what things really exist. And I would give you 4 categories. Obviously, the physical world, concrete objects in the physical world. Then abstract objects, which, like mathematics, that you can't really place in the physical world, but seem to have a reality. And third, and this is a controversial one, consciousness. Some people think consciousness has an independent existence. Some people say it's dependent upon the physical world, but nonetheless it has to be explained. And the fourth would be some sort of a spiritual reality if you believe in God or whatever. But I have 4 categories. How do you see that?
That seems right. You might think that there's really going to be at most 3 categories, because you might think that consciousness, human consciousness, is either going to be some sort of physical phenomenon, in which case it goes with category 1, or it's some sort of non-physical spiritualistic phenomenon, in which case it goes with category 4. So you might think that.
Okay.
And you'd have only a 3-way distinction.
But speaking as a philosopher, how would a professional philosopher approach the sort of the metaphysics of discerning what things really exist?
Well, I have a specific view about metaphysics in general. So metaphysics consists of these questions about the world, things like, is the mind really just the brain? Is there a God? Are there abstract objects? And I think that all of these questions, so metaphysics it's called metaphysics for a reason. It's supposed to be beyond the physical sciences. But I actually think when you start analyzing these metaphysical questions, they start boiling down to questions that we recognize as being not really metaphysical. Either, in particular, they turn out to be either empirical questions about the physical world or logical questions about how 2 concepts fit together or not, or they just turn out to be factually empty. So really, all the facts there are just physical empirical facts and logical facts. And if any metaphysical questions try to go beyond that, they're entering into factual emptiness.
Which means they're just meaningless words.
No, I don't think they're meaningless. That's what the logical positivists thought, that these things are meaningless. But what I think is there's no right answer about the question. So I understand the question, it's meaningful, but there's no right answer. It's factually empty.
So you're distinguishing between factually empty and linguistically meaningless.
Right.
Because it does have meaning, but there's just no fact of the matter that can help you discern what the answer is.
Right. Example.
Yeah. But it sounds like that view, though, is sort of rooted in a materialistic worldview, and that is what's driving your analysis, that if your view was perhaps more amenable to a spiritual worldview, that there exists some spiritual world, you would have more flexibility in your approach to metaphysics.
That's actually not entirely true, because
Is it a little true?
It's a little bit true. I have a pretty materialistic view, but the view I was just describing allows for it turning out that there is a God and there is spirituality. I think there is spirituality. The question is spirituality non-physical?
Sure.
So
if it's not, to me, it's factually
I don't
empty.
think the question, is there a God, is factually empty. I think the question, is there a God, falls into the category of a physical, empirical question. God is supposed to be somebody who created the world. Is there a person who created the world? That's a perfectly clear question with a right answer. And I think it needs to be handled in the way we handle other questions about the physical world, namely by looking for evidence. So I don't think that's a factually empty question. It could turn out...
Isn't that a category mistake, trying to prove something in the physical world, something that is by definition outside of it?
Well, you could find evidence for it. If he created the world, then there might be evidence that he created the world. So it's not completely isolated. Abstract objects are completely isolated, so it would be, I think, a category mistake to look for evidence of abstract objects in the physical world. So I think that's not an empirical question. I think that is a factually empty question. But the God question is different, because God is supposed to interact with the physical world. He made the world. And so we could look for evidence of it. And if there is evidence, then I'd say, okay, believe in God. So I would stick with my view of metaphysics, but have a non-materialistic view.
You've called yourself a gentler, kindler positivist. What does that mean? You look gentle and kindly to me, but what does that mean?
Well, it means that I have a view that's very similar to the view that the positivists held, namely that, that view is a positivistic view. All there is are physical, empirical facts and logical facts. But my arguments for the view are completely different. So they argued for the view by arguing that metaphysics is meaningless. I don't think that. I think it's meaningful, but just factually empty. I also think that lots of metaphysics is factual because it's empirical. So for instance, the question, do we have free will, I think is a perfectly factual question with a clear answer that we need to discover. The positivists wanted to get rid of all of metaphysics. I want to save lots of metaphysics, and the parts I get rid of I think are meaningful. I just think they're factually empty.